Welcome back to Proxhammer, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about the rise of Craftworld Ulthwe, and we're going to be also talking a little bit about what the state of the Craftworld is in the Nephilim expansion. So this is something I've touched on a few other times. I believe that Ulthwe, as well as the Bealtan, are going to be primarily the best Craftworlds in this expansion pack, aside from already the, of course, Hail of Doom, that has already existed in competitive play for quite a while now. However, I think that because of the recent nerfs, I think that Ulthwe is actually going to be in a much stronger place, both in terms of competitive play and in casual play as well. I think they're going to be much stronger. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. What we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be looking at the Craftworld traits, Warlord trait, Relic, and Stratagem. So we're going to be going over all the basics of the Ulthwe Craftworld and talking about why those are stronger now. And we're going to be looking at why Ulthwe is in a great position after the changes in Nephilim. So Ulthwe's army bonus is the Foresight of the Damned. It gives them a greater resilience with most of their army. They get a 6+ invul save army-wide, and a 5+ ignores mortal wound save. They get 1 wound reroll per unit. That's an army-wide buff. And they get +1 to all their first psychic tests made per unit. So this is especially strong on things like Warlocks, who only have 1 psychic power anyway, and who Ulthwe will field in great numbers. Their relic is the Ghost Helm of Al-Shazir. It's fantastic for undeniable psychic powers and actions. It does give an extra psychic power. Now, I know relics aren't really taken that much anymore in general, but if you can spare the points, this is pretty powerful. It's really effective at denying your opponent the ability to stop you scoring on psychic secondary objectives like Warp Ritual as well, because it does affect psychic actions. If you roll more than a 9, they can't stop you. Their specific Craftworld stratagem is Discipline of the Black Guardians and makes Guardian keyword units much more effective. This is especially good on support weapons that use indirect fire, as it counteracts the semi-recent nerfs to Ballista skill with the indirect fire rules. This is also pretty good with Windrider jet bikes as well, because they can also benefit from it, so you can have Windriders essentially hitting on 2+ with this stratagem. The Ulthwe Warlord trait is Fate Reader. It basically just allows you to retain an additional strands of fate dice per turn. Now, this is good. I just think it's more of a luxury now, especially if you are running low on command points. You might want to spend that on something like the Ghost Helm of Al-Shazir, and might not want to actually use it for this Warlord trait, but it is still decent. So, why is Ulthwe so strong? They didn't get any direct buffs, so why are Ulthwe all of a sudden the big topic now? Well, the reason why, I think it basically boils down to 3 key reasons, for me at least. One of those is that not a lot of the best Ulthwe units got nerfed. Warlocks, support weapons, Windrider jet bikes really didn't see a lot of nerfs, and they're still very strong and competitive units. Also, Nephilim's Warpcraft secondary objectives are very easy to score with Ulthwe, and arguably, the Warpcraft secondary objectives got a lot better, especially Psychic Interrogation. It's just absolutely fantastic. And Ulthwe has a lot of Psychers who can score on these very easily without sacrificing too much psychic power in the forms of their other psychic powers. And lastly, I think that support weapons with D-cannons are actually in a really good place right now. And it's my opinion, actually, that D-cannons are a fantastic alternative now to the Eldar Fire Prism, which before was basically dominating the Craftworld meta as far as the anti-tank capacities of the Eldar. And now the D-cannon, I think, competes very well with it. So when we're looking at why Ulthwe is strong, one of the things is that not a lot of the best Ulthwe units got nerfed. And if we look at Farseers, they were only slightly increased by about 5 points apiece. That's really not that much. Warlocks were essentially untouched. and had excellent value in Ulthwe lists before, and now, honestly, comparatively, they have even better value. Units with the Guardian keyword were largely unchanged, and a lot of us were hoping for buffs for Guardians. But I think that because units like support weapons and Wind Riders still have the Guardian keyword and are still very strong, I think we're going to see a lot more power coming from that sector of this Eldar Craftworld. Wind Rider jet bikes and also support weapons are very powerful still, and they didn't really see any nerfs whatsoever, with the exception of Scatter Laser Wind Riders, who increased by 5 points, but they're still very strong. And lastly, Wraith units remain solid with no nerfs as well, and I think Wraith units are the A to B tier unit in the Eldar army that is only A to B tier because they're extremely tough, but they require a little bit of finesse to use in most cases, and some support. But I still think that Wraith units have a very powerful place in the Ulthwe Craftworld. And honestly, I mean, I absolutely love Wraith Blades in Ulthwe as well as Wraith Lords. I think both of them are very powerful choices for supporting your other units, and they open up a lot of cool options for you. And next, we have to look at the Nephilim's Warpcraft secondary objectives and the fact that they're now easier to score with Ulthwe. So, first of all, Ulthwe gets +1 to all of their psychic tests, and because we lost To the Last and also Stranglehold as secondary objectives, we're going to be relying more and more on psychic secondaries to be able to score points on our secondary objectives, right? So Ulthwe has a much easier time scoring on these secondaries because of their +1, which makes it almost impossible to fail a psychic action like Psychic Interrogation or Warp Ritual. And also they have an abundance of Warlocks in the army already. Both characters and conclaves are taking in greater numbers, and the character Skyrunner versions especially are good at this, and Ulthwe has plenty of them. As for support weapons with D-cannons, they're in an extremely good spot right now, because value-wise, when you compare them to their competitor, the Fire Prism, they basically do almost the same thing. They basically ignore armor with AP -4. The Armor of Contempt and the new indirect fire changes, they don't really get affected as much by these. In fact, let's say that a Land Raider unwittingly comes into range of one of your D-cannon batteries. Those D-cannons, when they fire on it, are going to basically shred that thing because it's only going to get, I believe, a 4+ save, which I know that sounds like a pretty good save against it, but Land Raiders are pretty tough vehicles, and against most stuff, they're going to get a very good armor save. So, having a unit that can reduce their armor outside of line of sight, by the way, without any command point use, to a 4+ is pretty good, especially since Land Raiders are pretty tough. And let alone other vehicles. D-cannons absolutely shred other vehicles of other types. Dreadnoughts, Predators, Razorbacks, all of them can get shredded pretty easily by a D-cannon battery if they come into range of it. So D-cannons are a very good denial tool for preventing enemy units from basically staying and holding objectives. And the advantage they have over Fire Prisms is that they have Blast. And I know that seems like it may not be that big of a deal, but it means that they're slightly more effective at dealing with units that are larger units. So they have a little bit more versatility. And it may not come into play that much, to be honest, because they're mostly going to want to hunt tanks. But against units of 6+, they can do a little bit more damage to them and really, hit very hard. However, D-cannons are slow, and they do require good positioning in the beginning. But with the good, well, not really that good, but with the good amount of points extra that Fire Prisms cost now, right? They cost 5 more points, and then it basically costs 10 more points for the vectored engines. D-cannons are a lot more cost-effective in comparison and can do a pretty equivalent job against most targets, and they don't have to burn through a bunch of command points to stay alive. And personally, I love fire prisms, and I usually run 2 to 3 of them in a lot of different lists that they benefit from. So I have 3 fire prisms in my Beal-Tan list. I have 2 fire prisms in my Ulthwe list, for example. But honestly, I'm thinking of switching to D-cannons in my Ulthwe list because I think they're a lot more cost-effective in comparison. And D-cannons just work so well with Ulthwe, having the Guardian keyword, having the ability to reroll that 1 wound, and being able to deal mortal wounds as well, which are in addition to any normal damage they cause to enemy units, which increases their damage even further. I think, to be honest with you, this is more of a generalist unit that can be very powerful with Ulthwe as far as what it can take out. And fire prisms, I love fire prisms, but they cannot do anything against heavy infantry. Their disperse shot is absolutely terrible, and on average will only kill about 1 Space Marine. So just think about that for a second. 1 fire prism costing close to 200 points if kitted out with vectored engines can only kill a single Space Marine per turn with the disperse shot. That is absolutely awful. So again, fire prisms, great at hunting tanks, but not that versatile when dealing with other targets, which is why I believe that in an Ulthwe Craftworld, D-cannon support weapons are going to be much more popular now, especially since the increase in points cost to fire prisms. People are going to be looking for more cost-effective ways to deal with tanks, and also at the same time have a great unit that can benefit from a lot of the Craftworld abilities and stratagems and stuff like that. And that's where the D-cannons are at right now. So in conclusion, I think that Ulthwe is set up to be one of the most picked Craftworlds in the Nephilim competitive meta. And just to give you guys a point of reference, before Hail of Doom got nerfed and a bunch of our Aspect Warrior units got nerfed, everybody was essentially running Hail of Doom in the competitive scene. But the second most picked was Ulthwe because they have a very strong alternative to Hail of Doom, right? Their Craftworld traits are very powerful, very good. They get more Craftworld traits than you would normally in a custom Craftworld. So they were very powerful before. They just weren't seen as much because Hail of Doom was so dominant in a scary way, you know? I mean, think of it this way, right? Hail of Doom can still essentially do the same thing, but you have to pay more for it. And you can't combine it with other tricks and stuff like that, with other custom Craftworld traits. So Hail of Doom is still good on its own, don't get me wrong. It's just, as an army, Hail of Doom is going to be much less powerful. And as an army, Ulthwe has become comparatively much more powerful, in my opinion, than Hail of Doom. Especially with a lot of the units that they're good with. D-cannons don't really get anything out out of Hail of Doom lists, right? They don't work well with them at all, in my opinion. And again, that's just my opinion. If you can make D-cannons work in whatever list that you have, that's fantastic. But I just don't think they have a lot of synergy with Hail of Doom. They have a lot of synergy with the Ulthwe Craftworld. Especially with the amount of warlocks you can set up and things like that. I think it's going to be very powerful to have triple D-cannon in people's lists. And I know to some of you that seems kind of funny because, you know, it's like, how do I hide that many D-cannons? But in my opinion, they're fairly easy to hide. They're actually a little easier to hide than fire prisms because you could just set them up in a certain way. But I do think the combination of having escaped a lot of the nerfs and their psychic mastery of the Warpcraft secondaries to be able to score on them very easily and so forth, as well as the buffs to D-cannons that they can give their support weapons with their Craftworld traits, puts them in a great place to be one of the strongest Craftworlds in the current state of the game. And I've been playing around with a couple of different Ulthwe lists with more support weapons and things like that, and they've actually worked out pretty great, and I found myself not really even missing out on my fire prisms too much. The reason being is because the way I figure it, D cannons have a very short range, but they can also move. They're not completely immobile, right? They can move their 5 inches or whatever, they're 6 inches. I think they move 5, but maybe they move 6, maybe I'm wrong. And then they can still shoot. Now, yes, they will be at a -1 ballista skill, but again, you have the Black Guardian's trait. You have a lot of abilities to, give them more accuracy. And you also have Warlock powers like Reveal and stuff like that to ignore enemies' cover save. So even if they're not a core unit, they can still technically benefit from some of those debuffs on enemy units, like Reveal, right? So with all those things combined, I think Ulthwe is going to be in a very strong place. And, like I was saying, D cannons, I found myself not really missing fire prisms when I'm using these with Ulthwe Craftworld. And, these guys do have some advantages over fire prisms, that they don't cost as many command points to use the fire and fade or matchless agility shenanigans. You don't have to be spending points on that every turn. If you position them correctly, they should still be able to hit anything that tries to get onto an objective, which probably pretty easy for them to do because they do have decent range. And can always just move up in a pinch if you're slightly out of range of something. Yes, you will reveal yourself, but there are ways that you can kind of mitigate that with certain buffs and things like that. So, in general, I think these combinations with support weapons, the power of support weapons, especially D cannons, psychic powers, and having escaped a lot of the nerfs are going to make Ulthwe a very strong Craftworld in the current competitive scene, as well as in more casual play too. All right, everybody, that's it for today's video. If you have any comments or anything to add to this video or what you think about Ulthwe in the current state in the Nephilim expansion, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, I love responding to your comments and stuff like that. So please do leave a comment if you have one. All right, everybody, peace out. See you guys later.